Welcome to the CHCI Leadership Conference breakout session, Back to the Classroom. We are grateful to our sponsors, California Teachers Association, American Federation of Teachers, and National Education Association. Our panel chair for today's session is Representative Teresa Fernandez, representing New Mexico's 3rd District. She serves as the chair of the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States and has been appointed to the House Committee on Education and Labor, the House Committee on Natural Resources, and the Committee on House Administration. Our moderator for today's session is Tara Garcia Mathewson, an award-winning reporter covering innovation and inequality in education for the Hechinger Report. Please welcome our opening speaker, Representative Teresa Fernandez.
Buenas tardes. What an honor to say a few words to each of you attending today's CHCI's Back to the Classroom session. I'm Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez, representing New Mexico's beautiful and beautifully diverse 3rd Congressional District. You know, by being part of CHCI's mission to inspire a new generation of Latino leaders, you're taking the initiative to learn more about best serving all of our students, your students, this nation's students. I'm a Head Start baby myself. It's where I fell in love with learning. All of our students deserve to have access to quality, culturally competent education so that they too can fall in love with learning, just like I did. Our education system is a foundation for creating an equitable society. Racial, ethnic, geographic, gender equity, your important work gets us closer towards achieving each of those. The COVID-19 pandemic took a massive toll on our schools, you know that. The students with the least resources suffered the greatest learning challenges and losses. And although schools have demonstrated great resilience and the ability to adapt, the pandemic highlights the urgency of addressing the digital divide so that our students are equipped with the tools they need for learning and upward mobility. As a member of the Education and Labor Committee and the House World Broadband Task Force, I want to ensure that every student, regardless of zip code or economic background, can access high-speed internet. In response to the pandemic, we delivered crucial funding for our students and schools in the American Rescue Plan. And now, I hope you all take time to read what we just passed out of Education and Labor, because it will build on that success and invest in our children for a future of success from the earliest pre-K, early childcare, to college and our minority-serving institutions. Education is one of the most powerful ways to empower our youth. Thank you for your work to lay the foundation of progress for our students and for our future. Muchísimas gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Tara Garcia Mathewson. I'm an education reporter and the languages editor for the Hechinger Report, which is an independent nonprofit newsroom focused on innovation and inequality in education. We produced important, deeply reported stories on many of the topics we're going to discuss today, and I encourage you to check us out if you've never heard of us. We're at hechingerreport.org. Thank you to Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez for her opening remarks and for setting the context for our conversation. If you are watching this panel and want to tweet about it, please use the conference hashtag. It's CHCIHHM21. I am joined by 4 experts today to help you understand what is happening in schools and with Latino students specifically. I'm going to introduce them and share abbreviated versions of their very impressive bios. So please see the conference webpage for more about each of them. First, we have Carrie Rodriguez. She is president of the National Parents Union. Carrie is mom to Miles and Davis, who have given her firsthand experience with the challenges of navigating the country's education system. She's the founder of Massachusetts Parents United and an advisory board member of Democrats for Education Reform, among many other responsibilities. She's also a former journalist, a labor activist, and labor organizer.
Thank you. So nice to be with you.
We also have Gabriela Orozco Gonzalez. She's an elementary school teacher and has taught in the Montebello Unified School District for 20 years. She's a Common Core standards expert, master teacher, mentor, and California Core advocate. She's also a teacher leader for the Instructional Leadership Corps for Stanford University and the California Teachers Association, and she blogs about Common Core teaching strategies and curriculum.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
We also have Evelyn De Jesus. She's the Executive Vice President of the American Federation for Teachers, AFL-CIO. She began her career working as a state-certified parent educator in New York, and she has led a program for pregnant teens, worked as an early childhood teacher and reading specialist, and advocated on behalf of multilingual learners. She serves on a slew of task forces and boards, and again, I encourage you to read her full bio to see all of them.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
And finally, we have Noel Candelaria. He's the Secretary Treasurer of the National Education Association and the immediate past president of the Texas State Teachers Association. He worked as a teacher's aide and special education teacher in the Isleta Independent School District. He's also involved with the National Teachers Hall of Fame and the National Council of State Education Associations, and he serves on a number of national committees and task forces.
Thank you, Tara, for that introduction. Es un placer estar aquí con ustedes.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone watching. We are going to try and squeeze a lot into this conversation, so let's jump right in. We'll start with Evelyn and Noel. Please set the stage for us. Put the pandemic and this year's back to school in context for Latino students. What are the hopes and concerns? Evelyn, maybe you can go first.
Okay, thank you, Tara, for that lovely introduction. Hola a todos. It's good to see you again, my brother Noel. I would like to start by thanking mis hermanos y hermanas at CHI for organizing this critical, important panel that not only acknowledges what Latino parents, kids, educators, and communities have been living through for the last 18 months, but also addresses the hardest school year of our lives, the one that just started. Because the truth is that everyone in our communities coming to school this fall is bringing with them everyone. We could focus on the disproportionate burden carried by Latino communities during the pandemic, where more than 100,000 of us died, and hundreds of thousands got really sick, myself included. And where, as essential workers, most Latinos simply had to show up in dangerous workplaces since they didn't have a work at home option. That is, if they didn't get laid off from restaurants, construction work sites, or entertainment venues that simply shut down and they had to worry where the next meal was coming from. These were profound and traumatic experiences for millions of families, particularly for children who experienced a death in the family, went hungry due to loss of income in the household, or those who slipped into depression. And this year, as they go back to school, they will be carrying those experiences with them every day. Or we could talk about how and why online instruction was a disaster for millions of English language learners, Black and brown low-income students, and special needs students, because up to half of our Latino students didn't even have access to decent broadband, basic technology, and even use phones to attend school. Sometimes they were sharing phones in a family with family members. Other times they just did without. These experiences were the same for students in urban and rural communities. As a result, 3 million students basically disappeared from the school system, many of whom, as we know, were Latino. There were no real way to measure how far behind these students are, but we do know this. These kids and their families are eager for school to begin. And what we know is that they are going to need a lot of extra support. Whatever happens this year, we know we can't return to so-called normal, because normal was already a terrible state of affairs for Latino kids. Our hopes are closely connected to our concerns. Between the CARES Act and President Biden's American Rescue Plan, we finally have the resources we need to address the iniquities that we all knew about, but now the rest of the country cannot ignore. In the AFT, we call this return, recovery, and reimagine. It's not enough to return to school. We need to reimagine public education. That's why the AFT gave $5 million in grants to our locals and state federations and nationwide back to school for all campaigns. Our members worked really hard to pass these bills, and we are still working for us to leverage them in a way which requires school districts to consult with stakeholders including teachers, educators, school staff, and their unions in planning to use these funds. That's how we can create schools that work for everyone, health students with disabilities, immigrant youth, low-income kids, with wraparound services that take kids' social and emotional needs seriously. And finally, we need to make sure the parents of these students are part of the process. I hope folks are thinking about regular parent service because the education of our children is the community's business. And because when parents are fully engaged, you can feel how the school atmosphere really sings. So you can see that our hopes are intimately connected to our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Noel, do you want to add to that context?
Yeah, and to build on to what my Mana Evelyn said, I got to experience this pandemic not just as an educator, as a special education teacher, but as a parent, right? And the impact that it had also on, at home with my two own kids who are very different learners, and my wife who's also a teacher, and kind of gave me a first-hand look perspective of what we went through, but also knowing and seeing what our members and the educators across the state when I was state president when this started, because it's hard to believe that we're already this is the third school year impacted by the pandemic. And so clearly we know that it didn't impact all students equally. And unfortunately, like Evelyn said, our students of color and students with disabilities were the ones that were hit the hardest. When all this began, the challenges that we saw before the pandemic were amplified during this pandemic, whether it was a digital divide, the access to the internet, safety at home. These were all still the issues that are highlighted in our communities. And the thing is that I am more hopeful than ever because finally there seems to be light at the end of this tunnel, and it's no longer dim. Like Evelyn said, the light is shining bright on what the needs are that need to be done in our most vulnerable community. We have seen those issues kind of taken on a whole new light that folks are now noticing. It's why, like Evelyn said, we advocated so hard for the funding through the American Rescue Plan, because now we have a real opportunity to do something that has never been done, to do something that our public education system was never intended to do. And that is to provide every student, regardless of race or income, the same opportunities. Let me also add that in light of the many challenges and concerns that local, state, and national responses to this global pandemic have laid bare, a group of NEA members who all participated in a new leadership program built around education justice began to dialogue. They discussed how in this unprecedented time, educators and policymakers can address inequities and work to ensure an equitable and just learning environment for every single student. See, out of those conversations were recommendations on how to pursue education justice for all students. And some of those recommendations included creating an equity plan with stated goals and objectives to ensure equitable learning opportunities for traditionally underserved students, increasing response to intervention and other programs that support students' social and emotional well-being, providing wraparound services such as those implemented in full-service community schools, building stronger connections with families and communities to better equip them to support student learning, considering suspending standardized testing that is not diagnostic in 2021-22, and allowing schools and educators to focus on learning loss and students' social and emotional needs. Also continuing to remedy the homework gap by providing access to digital devices and home broadband internet to all students, and ensuring that educators, including education support professionals, have adequate pay and healthcare benefits. This is what I'm hopeful for in the future.
You mentioned a lot of elements, things that were one following advocacy, and I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more, Carrie. Maybe you can talk about the kind of advocacy work that needed to happen over the last year to get us to this point where we can talk about things that we are hopeful about rather than just concerned about.
Yeah, I share hopeful, but I'm cautiously optimistic because what we're even seeing in this moment are a lot of promises, but what's actually playing out real time in front of school boards is a little bit disconcerting. What we have tried to do with our organization, reaching more than 15 million families in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico, is really try to quantify the priorities of parents, specifically what they're concerned about when it comes to unfinished learning and what they want to see from their schools as they're reimagined in the future. Really kind of double click on that. Like, what are your top priorities? What are you really concerned about? What have you seen playing out in your living room over the past 18 months that you want to change? And so that's been critically important. And I think helping to inform the conversation, not through anecdote and guessing, but literally having the data through 21 national polls um, to really try to focus the conversation around a lot of the things that my friends on this panel have been talking about. Parents are critically concerned around social emotional support, getting our kids social workers and guidance counselors. We still have ratios that are into the hundreds, and our kids are coming back from a period of isolation where they really need support more now than ever. Parents also supporting individualized education plans for every child. We need to figure out what kind of unfinished learning has occurred and what our vision is to get our kids back to where they need to be, but beyond that, where we want them to go into the future. What's the outcomes that we're looking for our kids, and making sure that our children are having culturally responsive experiences in the classroom. The fact of the matter is the majority of our classrooms are led by white teachers. And we know that we have to deal with a lot of systemic racism within the education system. What are we going to do in this moment of unprecedented disruption to really start to address some of the critical issues that lead to the underperforming of our kids in the classroom? Parents, families, and communities want to be real stakeholders in that conversation. We don't want to be box checked. We want to be collaborative co-creators in coming up with the solutions for what the outcomes are going to look like for our children. And they are our children.
We're going to dig into a lot of these elements more and what they're looking like already as kids are back to school. I'm wondering, Gabriela, can you talk about what back to school is like in your school, in your classroom, in your district?
Sure. It's interesting. Last night I had our first back to school night, and I've always looked forward every year to having my classroom filled with parents and younger siblings just excited to be and in the classroom looking around the class. And this year we had it virtually for the safety of our parents and teachers. And even though that students are masked and they're coming to school with all those safety guidelines, they're so excited. That's not even the right word. Really, they're jubilated. I mean, they're so excited to be with their teacher. I am too. And being in the classroom has always been a passion for me. And being a bilingual teacher, and I hear you, Carrie, about those periods of isolation the students have had at home that they haven't had opportunities to really interact, to practice English, because I serve a large portion, I think 90% is our English language learners in my community. I teach in a small barrio in Los Angeles County, Pico Rivera. And the parents last night expressed a lot of your concerns, Carrie, where they said, we want to continue being partners in the classroom. We want to continue to be heard and come to meetings and participate of how we go forward in this new era of not only distance learning, online academies, but also in-person learning, where we feel a little disconnected because we can't attend all those PTA meetings the way we used to and be on campus. And what we want to do as educators is reassure them that they continue to be our most vital partner in the classroom, because I feel that the biggest thing that I think has come from this pandemic and this transition to back to the class has been that parents, we realize, have always been the number one teacher at home, and they're great partners for us as educators. I myself have 2 children in middle school, and we see how important it is, that collaboration for us to really bridge that gap together. So one of the things that we've really worked on is building community, having access to parents virtually, providing them with a voice and a forum for them to be heard, and also really addressing those needs of kids to express themselves in class. So every day having those morning meetings to have a check-in. And even though our school has always been a California distinguished school where we hit those standards the very first day, we really have to reevaluate our curriculum and say we have to embed some sessions where students have a moment to express how they're feeling, how they see themselves in class, and that they have opportunities to just have dialogue about their experience, and so that we can start to diminish a little bit of those feelings of isolation and start feeling part of the community. And a lot of it has been lower class size. I think in California, our governor and legislation, and with collaboration of our California Teachers Association, is really investing in education from TK all the way to our community colleges. Our school, really working collaboratively with our local to just build a really strong memorandum of understanding to lower class size, because we know that when we have smaller class size, we have more one-on-one time with our students. And that's really putting students first, by giving us opportunities to, the more access they have to me and to our educators in the classroom, the higher chance we have of that child thriving and closing that gap, and allowing more time to communicate with parents, because lower class size will give me more opportunity to have those one-on-one conversations with parents, and really curate a curriculum for that child, so that it allows them to not only thrive in class, but to have really meaningful lessons that will not only be culturally responsive, but really bring all those issues that they've experienced in the past, like you said, this is our third year, to light, and give those opportunities for us to really have open and honest dialogue about their experience.
We're going to talk more about the social emotional needs of students and staff members even going into this school year. Before that, Evelyn, I think you were going to share a back to school example from Puerto Rico. What's happening here?
Yeah, so I want to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised. You know, they've gone through so many disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes. But Puerto Rico's 751 schools are 100% in person and have the strictest, and I've been all over the nation, they have the strictest, best organized safety protocols that I've seen anywhere. We have tens of thousands of members of the Asociación de Maestros there, and they are doing a fantastic job. In fact, the interim Secretary of Education took the AFT's proposed reopening plan and put it to work. The school nurse meets everyone at the door and takes their temperature. And she carefully inspects your vaccination card, your ID, or you don't get into the school. All students wear masks and pay strict attention to 6 foot social distancing. Even though the CDC dropped the recommendation to 3 feet, they stayed at 6. All teachers have face shields in addition to their masks, so they can raise their voices without fear of infecting their kids. Their protocols for what to do if folks get sick are amazing. Everyone is thoroughly trained, and the contact tracing is phenomenal. So they can find out how and when someone got infected. They're using every available space. When there's no AC, they turn on fans, open windows, and set up tents. And they're using every available person. Everyone is an educator in the school, including the paraprofessionals, which you call teacher aides. It's pretty amazing, and it's working. And I'm just so excited about that.
That's great to hear. Thanks for the dispatch. Now, Carrie, another big back to school challenge has been transportation. We don't have the bus drivers we need to get kids to school. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think this is a critical issue that is just not being talked about, and it's putting so much pressure on parents and families and schools and districts right now. It's kind of like the secret that is happening that we really need to address. It's disproportionately impacting our kids directly, especially in the urban areas. I don't know of an urban school district in America. And this week alone, I have been to Oakland, I have been to Minneapolis, I have been to Boston, and I have been to New York. All of them are impacted by the failure to be able to hire bus drivers and get our kids to school. So we can't even have a conversation about how are we going to deal with unfinished learning? Like, what are we going to do with kids? Are we going to accelerate, not remediate? All of these things until we address, the fact that we're seeing reductions in bus driving staff by 30%. 40% in some areas. I mean, even when we're offering bonuses and everything else, we have kids who are getting off the bus at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. We have buses that are canceled in the morning, so parents can't go to work. So kids can't get into the classroom. So right now, I think what's a critical issue is dealing with transportation, but also making sure, and I love to hear Evelyn talking about, some of the COVID-19 mitigation strategies they're using in Puerto Rico. But another issue is dealing with what you have to do with children when they do present symptoms and have to quarantine. There's not really a good amount of guidance, enough effective guidance coming down from the Secretary of Education, from the CDC around how to handle quarantine. What qualifies as COVID-19 symptoms? I'm hearing from parents across the country saying my kid has seasonal allergies and now he's got to quarantine for 10 days, but then a kid in another district doesn't have to. And do I have to keep my older kid? It's mass confusion. And when all of this stuff happens, kids end up out of the classroom. And a lot of the time, the improportionality of these things always hits our kids in our communities the worst. When white kids get a cold, our kids get pneumonia around these issues. And so we've really got to deal with this because it's putting unprecedented panic on parents and families and school leaders. I know school leaders that I've talked to this week in Minneapolis saying, you know what, the buses aren't showing up. I can't get bus drivers. I'm putting kids in my car and I'm driving them home myself. That is not sustainable and we can't keep it going. This is something that's got to be addressed with urgency.
Mm-hmm. Massachusetts called in the National Guard to step in as bus drivers. Fire.
Yeah.
One of the biggest concerns when schooling went remote was the idea of access and digital access, the infrastructure, the tools to enable virtual learning. Evelyn, can you tell us about the progress made toward closing the digital divide during the pandemic and bring us up to date on lingering concerns?
Okay, thank you. Well, Tara, I think there's some very good news on this front. But do you remember that photograph of the two Latino teenage girls using the Wi-Fi outside a Taco Bell to do their homework in Silicon Valley? I can't get it out of my mind. So the good news is that President Biden's American Rescue Plan put $122 billion towards K-12 education and $7.2 billion for E-rate programs so that schools and libraries could get broadband connectivity. We still have to be laser focused and stay on top of districts to make sure they're using the funds for the right purpose. It's also exciting that the so-called hard infrastructure bill passed by the Senate includes $65 billion for broadband connections throughout the country. We could be on the verge of finally closing the digital divide, but we must make sure that children, educators, and parents especially get the training they need to use all this technology. We have this idea that kids somehow grow up magically knowing how to use these devices and access the internet. They all don't, and their parents really don't. And to be honest, some of our veteran teachers need training to make the latest technology fulfill its classroom promise. With all these resources, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity now, ahora, Tyra. We're serious about an equitable and safe return to school for all of us. Educators and their unions, parent groups, community groups just have to stay on top of it to make sure the opportunity doesn't go to waste. I'm really excited and I'm gonna push. And we gotta be the watchdog, as Kerry said. We gotta make sure voices of every constituent is on the table.
And Evelyn, if I can just back you up on this, like what we're seeing from parents, I mean, we were handed Chromebooks, like $200 Chromebooks that were not meant to be used for 6 hours a day for 18 months. We need Chromebook hospitals. That's what we had to set up in some areas because of these Chromebooks are falling apart. And I'm sorry, $10 internet that have been offered in some of our urban areas to low-income parents and parents of color, it doesn't cut it. It's not good enough. And frankly, to have equitable access to education during a pandemic, if you don't have access to connectivity, you're not getting you're not getting faith. And the bottom line is, Like, we have the technology. We just have to have the political will to say these kids are important too. They need the technology and they need the access.
Well, and if I can
Noel,
add to
can
that,
you
Carrie,
jump
it's really important to think of the infrastructure needs, right? Not just in urban communities, but even in rural communities. My experience, being a state president in Texas and a lot of the rural communities that don't have the infrastructure. So, we saw with the E-rate, I mean, the application rate for this fund, open, I mean, was really high. But what we're lobbying for right now, which is where we need parents to join us in this partnership, is the funding that the Democrat budget reconciliation bill, which is adding an additional $4 billion for this. Thanks to Representative Grace Meng and Chairman Frank Pallone and Senators Ed Markey and Chris Van Hollen, they've been our champions on this. But we need to bring all of our voices in because the E-rate and being able to connect kids is great, and that's what we need. But we also need to build on the infrastructure needs to connect every student, regardless of where they live, and we have to have, like Terry said, it's the work that we do collectively as parents and educators, so that those that are elected to leadership, whether it's in our state legislatures or in Congress, are allocating the resources that are needed to build the right infrastructure to connect all of our kids and their communities. We had, just like we had students struggling to connect, we had teachers struggling to connect. From teachers that live in some of the remote areas. That couldn't get access to the internet and couldn't connect with their own students and had to drive in some cases, 40 minutes to an hour just so that they can actually connect with their students, adding to the stress that they already had. So this is a huge, huge issue. If we really want to use technology to help set up our students for the future, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure and that we're all advocating collectively to make sure that infrastructure and those dollars are allocated so that we can build the infrastructure that's needed.
Education Superhighway announced that virtually every single school in America had a basic level of broadband access. And then 3 months later, schools closed and it didn't matter. All of a sudden, we needed internet in every single home, not just every single school. So, go ahead, Gabriela.
But it also is, I'm not in a rural area. I'm in a big city, and we had a lot of modernization issues in our school campus and around our neighborhood where the infrastructure just wasn't there. And there's a huge digital divide that Evelyn spoke to. And we also needed a Chromebook hospital, like Carrie mentioned, where we had Chromebooks for all our students, and we had students that hadn't been trained on them, teachers and so forth. And we had very affordable internet that didn't have a wide broadband. And so we did have connectivity issues. And it really forced the school district to allocate funds. And I think I always say, I'm so thankful to our union to advocate for teachers and to make sure, because in the end, what we want is that equity and that access for all our students. And we were able to upgrade our broadband and get our students the right internet needed for them to have a successful school year. And even then we had a lot of gaps because Chromebooks would fall apart. But I always say these students are so amazing. They're so resilient. I think that they are native to technology, actually. I sometimes think that they're born into knowing exactly what to do. But a lot of it has to be with the support of their parent and access at home. And if they don't have that, then we definitely need some think tanks and some accessibility for both teachers to get them trained and some time to do that, an allocation of during the school day for them to get the proper training to continue teaching their students what not only best practices are, but how to utilize those new technology tools since they've never had them before.
Let's go back to talking about social emotional learning and social emotional supports. I think from the very beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like teachers everywhere and educators everywhere recognized that students were going through a trauma. We were going through this collective trauma that we needed to pay attention to, and strict academics had to be, set aside in some cases. And I'm wondering, how are schools approaching these social emotional needs going into this school year for staff as well as students? Maybe Gabriela, you can start and talk about your school.
Well, our school has put aside some allocation of funding for counselors, a little bit more, maybe tools. We've actually, our school district has actually done something monumental. We added actually a professional learning committee as a district that is composed majorly by teachers, and a lot of our focus has been around social emotional learning and getting teachers to teach other teachers of how to incorporate that into their classroom. So we've set a time for professional learning, within the school day or sometimes in the weekends, to really work on how to have a meaningful conversation with students about trauma. I myself lost my father at the beginning of the school year to COVID, and one of the biggest things that I found was that students were also having that loss at home. And I didn't want to talk about it in the class because I thought it was so personal. And I found that it was important to do that, because by them listening to me, it allowed to have that safe, open space to have that dialogue. And so we continued doing that into the beginning of the school year, where we have morning meetings, where we have a check-in, and we're given a little bit of a toolkit to kind of have those conversations so that students feel every day a little closer to opening up and to having those really difficult conversations. But at the same time, it makes the rest of the day so meaningful, because now they feel like they're part of our tribe. And I always feel that I'm their coach and really they're my team. And once they feel that unity, I feel that they start to really engage in meaningful lessons in class, because they feel safe. And that's what our students need. So I think our school district has done a really good job in, again, building community, giving teachers opportunities to learn and to practice, and then come back to their school sites and implement some of these new strategies to open those conversations for our population.
So we have a lot of teachers kind of being forced to step up here. Carrie, maybe you can talk about, a big challenge is the capacity in districts with social workers. I mean, what are the concerns from your organization's perspective here?
Well, what we're very concerned about is making sure we're not just getting social workers and guidance counselors, but we're getting culturally competent social workers and guidance counselors. Our children are crying for it. I was with students in Minneapolis this week saying it's not just enough. Like, again, they're dealing with ratios in the hundreds in their high schools there, with kids who are teenagers who are going through a lot in Minneapolis, where they've had a racial explosion happening in their community. They have a lot going on, and to have ratios in the hundreds, and to walk through schools that, the majority of the faculty, the majority of the educators are white. These kids are literally at the school board asking for social workers and guidance counselors of color to be there for them, to help them through these moments. We have been working with the Secretary of Health and Human Services to talk about the fact that racism is actually a public health crisis, and what can they be doing to help support schools, get additional funding, whatever we need to do to incentivize, to get more teachers of color, educators of color, counselors of color, social workers of color to work in our schools to address some of the major issues these kids are going through. So not only are we seeing it, through the parent and family lens, but we've got to listen to our children who are speaking up and asking for what they need in this moment, and they need us today.
I just wanted to jump in and said, this is what we know. We know that most kids are going to start the year looking at last year's curriculum because they didn't get through it. And we know that most kids have experienced, as everyone has said on this panel, some version of loss, upset, family conflict, as Carrie said, trauma, and Lord knows what else. Until we get their social, emotional selves on track, they're not going to be able to learn anything academic, period. Our teachers and our support staff know this, and their classrooms will reflect it. What will really help everyone is if states follow Florida's lead and suspend the high stakes, high stress, standardized testing for this academic year. I know we need a baseline, I know, and accountability matters, and I know that high stakes standardized testing in the most important school year of our lives is the enemy of powerful learning. So as we reimagine public education in the wake of a global pandemic, let's do everything we can to take the pressure off our teachers, our students, our families. We'll even gain at least another 3 weeks for instruction if teachers do not have to do these full test prep modes. So if we're saying that these kids are behind, disrupted, we're saying they've had loss, and now you're putting a test to baseline them or to categorize them if they're efficient or not, on top of everything else, that we really got to, Kerry and Gabriela and Noel, us as advocates, we really got to push that and say, hey, basta ya. Let's get them emotionally, the whole child, the whole village healed as best as possible, and then move on accountability and all that, because this has been a tremendous year. And to add that on top of everything that's social emotional would be tragic, in my opinion.
Well, Evelyn, I have to respectfully disagree with you on this because I think that, while the accountability and the high stakes piece of this is definitely something to look at, I don't know how we move forward without data, without information, without a diagnostic assessment to tell us exactly what kind of unfinished learning has occurred so that we can plan and have the resources in front of the kids that need it the most. And without data, we can't make informed decisions. And we have a lot of folks right now who are flying blind, spending money very foolishly on things that we don't need or maybe we do need. We don't know without having data and information. And while we should take a look, absolutely, at the pressure cookers that we're creating in classrooms and in schools, I don't agree with that. But we do have to have data and information that helps us help our kids. I wouldn't take my kid to a doctor that didn't use a thermometer to tell me, how sick my kid was, because I need him to have information to determine how much medicine they need or if they need medicine at all. But right now, I wouldn't agree that this is the time to start, flying blind and just making blind guesses. Our kids actually need us to make really informed decisions. It's a critical time.
We do need to move into Q&A. I want to talk, so we've talked about the importance of social emotional, and we've already started transitioning into this idea of how much we should be focusing on academics and holding schools accountable for that. And so let's talk about how schools are supposed to balance these two things. Is it possible? How are we going to move kids forward this year and see some academic progress?
So, as you know, I often say that good teachers are magicians, but even magicians need support from principals, districts, and states to do their magic. The best way to help them balance everything they need to do is to follow what Florida has done. And that is, I'm still standing, I'm not saying not testing, I'm just saying high stakes standardized testing. Otherwise, we run into the plain fact that the school day and the school year is just too limited. But I'll be really interested in to see what Gabriela says about her classroom and how she feels about that, because she's a practitioner and she's on the front lines every day.
Yeah, Gabriela, why don't you tell us how you are planning to balance this?
One of the things that we really try to do is right now currently is we are doing our own formative and summative assessments. We are building all this data up individually in our classrooms. Absolutely. I mean, coming from, like I said, I'm not only a Smarter Balance, a former assessment writer, but I wrote a lot of those performance tasks and so forth. And so we still continue to do those best practices in class. As educators, we have our assessments, we share them, we share that data with our grade level meetings. And what we're trying to do right now is really target those students, not only in language needs, because like I said, we have a large population of English language learners, but also with students with gaps. And by looking at the data that teachers have formulated, tests created by teachers, driven by teachers, are way more meaningful than a high stakes test, because they represent our population, they represent our community. And by sharing that information in our grade level meetings, we're able to target those students that really need support. So what we're doing is not only pull out for a short amount of times, because I also believe the child needs to be predominantly in their primary class, but also just, again, I come back to class size. By having that smaller class size, I'm able to give that more individual targeted attention to students. So I think that's the biggest balance, where we're saying these students need support. We're going to give teacher the tools by giving them a smaller class size. The more the student has access to the teacher, the more time that I'm able to not only assess, but give them individual instruction that's really curated to their needs. And I think that's been, even last night when I had my back to school night conversation with the parents, where, wow, I'm really excited to see some of this writing that my child's bringing home that really targets where their gap is at. And they were excited to have that intervention not only within the classroom, but the funding allocated to after school, where they can go and get homework help, not only, but in subject areas, but we're even doing physical education intervention, where students are getting an after school program where they can do PE, classes where they can do also engineering and tinkering. So as a school district, we're trying to support not only students' interests, but really where their gaps are. So definitely, Carrie, we're assessing, we're doing those summative and formative assessments, but we're just doing them teacher created and teacher led and grade level, so that every classroom in second grade and third and fourth and fifth have uniform assessments, but that they're meaningful to our population. So I think that that has been key to keeping them not only on that thriving path, but really making education in the classroom more meaningful for each individual student.
The key here is, making sure that we're reaching the whole child, right, and the needs of the whole student. Which, when you ask teachers about data, teachers love data. They assess. As a teacher in my classroom, I was assessing every minute of every second of every day that I was interacting with my students. As I was delivering the lesson, as they were responding, as they were writing, and I'm walking around the room, we were constantly assessing. The standardized test at best, the best designed standardized test at best measures 40% of what a student actually knows, right? And it was never designed to show student growth. That was not what it was intended for. And so trusting our teachers, trusting the experts, the practitioners in the classroom who are directly working with our students every single day, and giving them the time to then assess and learn from each other and learn and work with the parents. Gabriela and Carrie have both said the communication between the teacher and the parents is so critical, but making sure that the teacher has the right tools, that the teacher is utilizing the right assessments that they are developing to meet the individual needs of every one of their students. And when we talk about classrooms like Gabriela is talking about, the teacher can then help meet the individual needs of every single student, so that we are then differentiating the curriculum to meet the needs of the whole child and making sure that every child is able to rise to their full potential. That is what we want as teachers, as educators, and that is the type of relationship that we want with the parents. Because when your child walks into our classroom, they become our children, right? And we both have a goal to make sure that our children are prepared, so that when they leave our classrooms, they're prepared to fulfill their own individual potential. And so, it's making sure that we're using the right types of assessments that are giving us data in real time, so that we can adjust and inform our instruction and our curriculum and our delivery in real time, not wait till the end of the school year to some standardized test that by then it's too late. Let teachers teach, give teachers the time to teach, and give teachers the time to collaborate and work closely with parents to meet the needs of every single one of our students.
I would love to jump in. I really appreciate, because the timeline and getting data back is excruciating. It's excruciating for parents and families as well. But what I will say is I fully have confidence that I am on this panel with world-class educators, but there are a lot of educators that need help. There are a lot of educators who need coaching around what those assessments should look like. There are a lot of educators that unfortunately do not believe kids like ours are capable of proficiency, let alone excellence, and need coaching and need, frankly, the addressing of implicit bias and everything else that may color what their assessment of our children is. And so, at least with standardized testing, there's a baseline. And while I appreciate the fact that we want to educate the whole child, and that we are partners in that, parents and families also tell us, constantly, and we have data and polling that shows this all the time, that really what they're looking for educators is being partners in making sure that our kids actually achieve that proficiency. They don't just grow, but they're able to read. They're not approaching reading and competency in math, but they're achieving proficiency. Because if we don't get it in third grade, Okay, we can't go back and do third grade. We can't get a refund. We want to make sure and be partners in making sure that the assessments that are happening in the classroom are getting us towards proficiency, not just growth, and making sure that those assessments are unbiased and free from the belief gap that we know exists in our classroom. So we want to be partners in that. But I think we have a long way to go before we can have assurance that those assessments are free from that.
And professionalizing the teaching profession. Because when we have systems that are deprofessionalizing the teaching profession, when we are looking at 53% of all teachers right now in our classrooms are thinking of leaving the profession, right? When we have 54% of teachers in Texas that come through an alternative certification program, right? There is a lot of work that we have to do to make sure that when a brand new teacher walks into the classroom on day one, they are prepared and ready and not shortchanging, making sure that we have strong mentorship programs, because I've yet to meet a teacher
I'm
that
going to
starts
jump in. This is a super long-term plan for improving. I want to just quickly talk about what we're doing this year for special education students, English learners, special education students who are immigrant students and also are English language learners. Can someone please jump in and just talk about, what are we doing for these students this year? What's the need?
Yeah, so I mean, as a special education teacher, it's always important to really think of our students with disabilities first and foremost as general education students, right? When students with disabilities, when they thrive, all students thrive because we are having systems and processes in place on campus and in the district that is helping to support all of our students. One of the things that we've been really strongly advocating for as NEA is ensuring equal access to public education with high quality services that all students deserve. As we recover from the pandemic, it's more important than ever to support special education students to have their needs met in a comparable way to non-disabled students. When we advocated for the ARP and the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, we wanted those to be used to provide the needed resources to address the social and emotional needs that were lost during learning time. That the foregone services, there were so many of our students that did not receive the services that they needed during the pandemic and the mental health supports for students with disabilities. So think of the many ways that the funds could help, right? We could hire additional staff to specifically address the needs of students with disabilities. What we have seen over the years is not only have we cut paraeducators and specialized support instructional teachers, we've seen those funding cuts from the state level that have really put states and school districts in a crunch and not having enough of the staff. And when we see the turnover in special education, the average is 3 to 5 years where teachers in special education are overwhelmed. And so they go back into general education because we don't have the support and service that they need to making sure that we are developing, trauma-informed educators, addressing the implicit biases, and making sure that all of our educators have the resources that they need. This doesn't just help our students with disabilities, it helps all of our students. So the educator voice and professional authority, we need to make sure that those are at the front and center because our students deserve the best teachers in front of them every single day. And we need to make sure that we have the services and support to make sure that we're meeting all of their unique needs.
Thank you. We are going to do closing statements. Everyone gets less than a minute to send us off into the world after this discussion. Let's start with Carrie.
Well, I'm just so grateful to be a part of this discussion, and I appreciate all of the effort and all of the time and the passion of all of my co-panelists here. On behalf of the parents and families in the communities that I represent, we are really looking forward to reimagining education and being collaborators and co-creators of what the future looks like for our education system. We have had this unprecedented opportunity presented to us with this challenge to really do something that's incredibly innovative in this moment. We now have an incredible amount of resources, and we're willing to dig in and do this work. And I just want to wrap up by saying, as the mother of a child with autism and ADHD, it is incredibly important that we see these children and the crisis that is in special education right now. There has been a lot of regression happening, and these kids deserve our best. They deserve our investment. And frankly, as we poll parents and ask them, where we should prioritize ESSER funding, special education, even for general matriculating students. Families believe that the money needs to be spent to make sure we address what they have lost as a main priority.
Gabriella?
Well, I'm really excited to listen to not only you, Carrie, and Evelyn and Noel, but really listen deeply to what your concerns are about our community, and because they're really my concerns also. I'm a parent and a teacher, and in a classroom, like I said, in the inner city where our students constantly need support. And one of the things that I've seen that is a huge takeaway is that we've really been able to see technology as our tool. I have a huge population of English language learners, and they can't see me pronounce words with a mask. And so one of the things that I did through technology was create videos for them, send them home. And my students are fortunate to have a biliterate teacher. I'm fluent in their language and in Spanish, and I'm able to translate and interpret a lot of the lessons that are in my classroom. But not all teachers are biliterate, and I do think that support is more needed. Our funding needs to be allocated to supporting more of our English language learners by providing them adequate materials and teachers that are a representative of our population. So I think the more bilingual teachers that we can have and the lower size will allow our population to thrive and to give them a better chance to perform in school the way that we want them to and that they need to.
Thank you. Evelyn?
So if there's one takeaway I like to leave this audience with is this. In the face of a brutal global pandemic that is still killing more than 1,000 Americans every single day, we have a once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime opportunity to reimagine, recreate public education. Just as the Latino children's family and communities bore the brunt of the pandemic burden, and I say that the brunt of it in lives, illness, unemployment, and evictions. They will benefit more than ever from these new investments in public education. But we have to be vigilant, as Kerry said, and make sure our school boards, our school districts use these resources for the purpose they were intended and not move the money for other things. If we do that, this is going to be one of the greatest school years, precedented school years that we'll ever have.
Thank you. Noel, final words?
Thank you, Tara. And we invite you to partner with us and connect with us. You can find us at NEA.org, NEA@justice.org, and educationvotes.NEA.org for the latest updates and action alerts for us to work together. Partner with the NEA at the national level and with our state and local affiliates in your community on the key priorities that we're working on. Ensuring the right to vote for Latino, Black, Brown, Native, and AAPI voters, empowering communities and schools to ensure that racial justice in public schools from pre-K to higher ed, which strengthens the whole community, and investing in healthy and strong communities and schools, advocating not only around COVID-19 causes, but also environmental justice concerns, getting Congress and this administration to finally fix our broken immigration system, starting with passing a reconciliation bill that includes a pathway to citizenship for as many of our undocumented brothers and sisters as possible. You can join us in contacting your members of Congress with this call to action at NEA.org/stream. Let's build the public schools that our students deserve. Let's build them to do what they were never intended to do, which is a just and equitable system that provides them with the opportunity to fulfill their own potential. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you to Carrie, Gabriella, Evelyn, Noel. Thank you for your passion and your insights. This has been an illuminating conversation, I think, that will keep us thinking for a while. I have some wrap-up notes about the conference, so please keep tweeting if you continue to attend panels throughout the conference. It's CHCIHHN21. There's a full slate of sessions scheduled for today, including more panel discussions and an evening plenary, Latino stories, new narratives in American media. Attend many more sessions today if you have the time. If you know people who'd be interested in the conference, but have not signed up yet, they are still more than welcome to log in and register at chci.org. And keep in mind that the virtual 44th Annual Awards Gala celebration is Thursday evening, September 23rd from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Once you're registered for the conference, you are also registered for the gala, so no extra work for you. That is all from us. Thanks again for joining, and keep kids and schools in mind as we continue bearing with this pandemic.